Tonight, we slip into an earth that doesn't smell like fresh rain or pine needles or sea salt. No, tonight, the air itself is a weapon. Imagine opening your door and being smacked in the face with the world's largest carton of spoiled eggs multiplied by infinity. You gag, you cough, and you realize there is nowhere to run. But what if the air you breathe could kill you, not by choking, but by tricking your own senses into silence? You're about to find out. Spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this one. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. No pressure, just a quiet nudge from me to you. Now, let the room soften, let the noise of the day slip away, dim the lights, and ease into tonight's journey together, where the world you know fades and a stranger earth rises to meet you. The sand beneath your feet feels damp, almost sticky. A warm wind whips against your face, carrying with it a sting that burns your nostrils and leaves a metallic tang on your tongue. This isn't a passing whiff, the kind you get near a hot spring or when someone burns a match. No, this is thick, greasy, suffocating. You breathe it in and it clings inside you, as if your own lungs are coated with invisible sludge. The rotten egg reek, hydrogen sulfide, has wrapped itself around the entire planet, and you, unlucky wanderer, are trapped in its grip. Overhead, the sky isn't blue, it's a smeared watercolor of yellow, gray, and faint orange, as though the sun itself has been dipped in smoke. Shadows stretch wrong, blurry, indistinct, while every sound is muffled. The world doesn't feel alive anymore, it feels like it's holding its breath. Mainstream paleontology points to the end Permian extinction, about 252 million years ago, as the likeliest stage for this sulfurous apocalypse. The Great Dying, they call it, an extinction so severe that nearly 90% of species vanished. Volcanoes erupted, oceans fizzed, skies dimmed, and somewhere in the middle of it all, the stench of hydrogen sulfide became the perfume of death. But let's zoom in closer. Picture a dawn here. The sun rises, if you can call it that, behind a screen of haze, bleeding dull yellow light into a sky that refuses to brighten. The ocean beyond the shore hisses faintly, bubbles breaking the surface with tiny, sinister pops. Birds? Gone. Insects? Silent. The only noise is the whisper of gas escaping from vents, a constant hiss like a leaky pipe that you can never fix. Here's the cruel trick of hydrogen sulfide. At low levels, you smell it. It's a warning system, one of nature's little alarms. But at high levels, the gas numbs your nose entirely. Imagine breathing poison so strong it hides itself. You'd think you were safe until your knees buckle and the world tips sideways. It's like Earth itself leaning down to whisper, "Surprise!" You wander farther inland. The ground is cracked in places, damp in others, and every pocket of moisture smells worse than the last. You crouch near a shallow pool, watch bubbles rise and burst, releasing sharp puffs of invisible gas. The smell slams into you like a prank gone wrong, and you stagger back, gagging. Somewhere in your mind you joke, "World's biggest fart joke," but the laughter dies quickly when you realize the joke is on everything that breathes. Here's a quirky tidbit. Scientists studying ancient rocks have found chemical signatures, tiny isotopic scars, that prove hydrogen sulfide once bled into the atmosphere. Think of it as Earth's version of graffiti, a permanent reminder that once the planet smelled like death itself. And the debates? Oh, they're endless. Historians still argue whether the stench was truly global or patchy, whether hydrogen sulfide was the main killer or just one assassin among many. Was it the gas that suffocated creatures, or the warming seas, or the collapsing food chains? The rocks tell fragments of the story, but never the whole. You look out over this landscape and realize something chilling. This isn't a single bad day. This isn't a storm that will pass, a wildfire that will burn out, or a volcano that will go quiet. This is an era. A generation could be born, live, and die under sulfur skies, never once breathing clean air. For them, the smell of rotten eggs wasn't a nightmare. It was simply reality. The breeze shifts, carrying another heavy wave of the stench, and your eyes water. You cough so hard your ribs ache. Somewhere deep in the shallows, microbes flourish in the mess, tiny architects of misery that belch more gas into the air. And you realize with a grim little smile, if anyone is having fun in this world, it's them.
The ground shudders beneath your feet, and for a moment you think it's your imagination, until a low, guttural roar rolls across the horizon. You turn, and there it is, a column of fire and smoke climbing skyward, so tall it looks like the earth itself has punched a hole straight into the heavens. The air vibrates with the force of it, your bones rattling with every rumble. And then the smell hits you again, stronger now, sharper, as if the planet has cracked open its pantry and all it had left was sulfur. This is no ordinary eruption. What you're staring at is the birth of the Siberian Traps, the greatest volcanic event in Earth's history. Imagine lava not dripping politely from a cone, but gushing in floods so vast they bury entire landscapes. For hundreds of thousands of years, fissures split open across what will one day be Siberia, vomiting fire and poison on a planetary scale. You edge closer, feeling heat prick your skin like a furnace door opening in your face. The molten rivers don't just flow, they surge, stretching as far as you can see. But the real killer isn't the lava, it's the gases. Sulfur dioxide, carbon dioxide, methane, and our old friend hydrogen sulfide billow upward, invisible daggers spreading through the atmosphere. Every breath tastes like acid, metallic and foul, a cocktail no creature ordered, yet every creature is forced to drink. Mainstream geology confirms that these eruptions blanketed an area the size of the continental United States with basalt. Picture molten rock piling layer on layer until it's thicker than Mount Everest is tall. But it wasn't just the rock. These eruptions cracked into coal seams, ignited oil shales, and released enough gas to poison the planet several times over. Some scientists think of it as the Earth setting fire to its own fossil fuel reserves, a planetary barbecue nobody asked for. Here's a quirky tidbit. The Siberian Traps may have released so much carbon dioxide that Earth's climate whiplashed. At first, volcanic aerosols reflected sunlight and cooled the globe, but then the greenhouse gases took over, flipping the planet into a long fever. Imagine living through a world that one decade chills you with volcanic winter and the next boils you alive in relentless heat. And the debates? Historians and geologists still argue whether the heat, the gas, or the chain reaction of collapsing ecosystems did the most damage. Was it the lava that poisoned rivers, or the carbon dioxide that acidified oceans, or the hydrogen sulfide that suffocated everything with lungs? The likely answer, all of the above, a perfect storm of disasters playing tag team with life. You watch ash darken the sky until the sun is no more than a faint orange smudge. Day feels like dusk, and dusk feels like midnight. The rain that falls is bitter, stinging your skin, sizzling faintly where it lands on stone. You imagine what forests must look like under this deluge, leaves burning, roots drowning, trunks splitting under chemical assault. The wind shifts again, carrying with it a fresh slap of sulfur, and your chest tightens. You cough, clutching your ribs, eyes watering. You picture herds of animals, reptiles, amphibians, insect swarms, trying to move away from the poison, only to find it waiting for them everywhere. You mutter under your breath, "So much for migration." But here's the strange part. This isn't a one-off apocalypse. The eruptions didn't last weeks, or months, or even decades. They lasted for hundreds of thousands of years.
Generations lived and died in a world where the air was poison, the water acidic, and the sky a permanent bruise. Imagine being born into sulfur skies, never once seeing a true blue horizon, and dying before the haze ever lifted. That was reality for countless creatures. You glance at the volcanic horizon again, the fire licking skyward, the sulfur stinging your nose, the ash dimming your sight. It feels endless, and you realize with a sinking certainty that this world doesn't belong to you anymore. It belongs to the volcanoes. The hiss of the shoreline greets you before you even see it. Not the soothing rhythm of waves, but a fizz, like someone poured 1,000,000 vats of soda into the sea. You edge closer, and the sight stops you cold. The ocean isn't calm blue anymore. It's alive with bubbles, burping gas into the sky. Each pop carries the same sharp, suffocating stench, sulfur clawing at your sinuses until your stomach lurches. This isn't water as you know it. It's broth, a steaming chemical stew. The shallows churn like a witch's cauldron, frothy and foul, every bubble a tiny death note. You crouch, dipping a hand toward the surface, and yank it back instantly. The water is warm, almost hot, with an oily slick that clings to your skin. Your fingertips prickle, and the smell lingers long after you wipe them on your clothes. Mainstream paleontology points out that during this time, shallow seas became ground zero for disaster. Volcanoes didn't just poison the air, they poisoned the water. As oxygen levels plummeted, marine ecosystems collapsed. Coral reefs, those bustling underwater cities, crumbled into ruins. Fish suffocated, their gills useless in water stripped of breath. Instead of a thriving sea, you're staring at a slow-motion graveyard. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some scientists think these waters turned strange colors, greens, purples, even streaks of blood red, as sulfur-eating bacteria bloomed. These microbes painted the seas in lurid shades, carpeting coastlines in mats that shimmered like spilled oil. Imagine standing here at night, seeing the tide glow faintly purple under the sulfur haze. Beautiful? Yes. Comforting? Absolutely not. And the debates? Historians still argue whether these shallow seas were the first domino to topple global ecosystems. Were they the spark that spread death outward, or just one casualty among many? Some drill cores show unmistakable black shales, sediment packed with organic matter that never decayed because oxygen was gone. But do those rocks prove the seas poisoned the world, or just their own basins? The jury's still out. You step along the shoreline, holding your breath as bubbles burst around you. A crab drags itself weakly across the muck, collapses, and twitches until it goes still. Fish float belly up, glinting silver against the green film. You reach for a shell, only to find it empty, the creature inside dissolved into the soup. It's a silence you can hear, broken only by the soft blip of gas breaking water. The sulfur motif sharpens here. The smell isn't just a stink, it's a curtain, rising from the sea, drifting across the land, seeping into every living thing. You gag, your throat raw, but there's nowhere to run. The gas is heavier than air. It hugs the ground, settles in low places, crawls inland with every breeze. You picture valleys filling like invisible bathtubs, suffocating anything foolish enough to wander down. And yet, even in this nightmare, microbes are thriving. They're not suffering through the sulfur, they're feasting on it. To them, this ocean isn't poison, it's paradise. They multiply wildly, exhaling even more hydrogen sulfide in the process. You can almost hear them celebrating in microbial unison, a party that only ends when everything else does. You straighten, wiping your face, but the smell refuses to leave. It clings to your hair, your clothes, your lungs. You take a shallow breath and glance at the horizon. The sea doesn't sparkle, it hisses. It doesn't invite, it dares. And you understand the truth. These shallow seas aren't just dying, they're turning into engines of extinction.
You leave the fizzing shoreline behind, but the air refuses to let you go. Each breath tastes like metal rubbed with vinegar, the stink settling deep in your chest. You rub your sleeve across your nose, but there's no escaping it. Then you see why. The land itself is carpeted in mats of slime. Green, purple, even oily black, the colors ripple faintly in the dim light. They sprawl across rocks, creep over tidal flats, and ooze into river mouths like slow-moving blankets. This is the empire of the microbes. Not the friendly, invisible kind hiding in your gut. These are sulfur-eating bacteria, ancient chemists thriving in places no sane organism would dare. They gulp down sulfur compounds and belch out hydrogen sulfide like little engines of rot. Imagine billions of microscopic factories chain-smoking rotten eggs into the air 24 hours a day. You crouch, curiosity stronger than your common sense, and poke the mat with a stick. It squelches. A puff of gas escapes, smacking you in the face with such intensity that your eyes sting and tears streak down your cheeks. You drop the stick, gagging, and stagger back, coughing until your chest aches. Somewhere in the microbial choir, they're probably laughing at you. Mainstream science explains that these bacteria flourished in oxygen-poor environments. Normally, oceans churn, circulating oxygen downward and nutrients upward, balancing the system. But when volcanic gases stalled circulation, the deep waters went anoxic, ripe for bacterial takeover. Once they got a foothold, they spread relentlessly, blanketing coastlines and turning Earth's edges into foul-smelling laboratories. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some researchers speculate these mats might have glowed faintly at night. Bioluminescence isn't unheard of among microbes, and in a world this dark and strange, glowing purple-green carpets could have lined the shores. You picture yourself walking along the water at dusk, watching the land shimmer like a rave floor, except the only thing being celebrated is your impending suffocation. Historians still argue about their role. Were these bacteria the prime villains, belching poison that killed ecosystems? Or were they opportunists, thriving in chaos but not creating it? The rocks tell us they were everywhere, but they don't answer the deeper question: did microbes drive extinction, or did they just cash in on it? You wander further inland, but the mats follow. They stretch like carpets across the ground, smothering roots and rocks alike. Plants wilt under their slimy reach. Insects that crawl too close get trapped, coated, and consumed. The smell rises in waves, stronger in some places, lighter in others, but never gone. You gag again and joke weakly, "Air freshener, brought to you by slime." The silence unnerves you. No birds, no insects, no rustle of mammals, just the occasional squelch as the mats shift under wind and moisture. You watch them ripple faintly, and for a moment you imagine them alive in a different way, not as billions of individuals, but as one vast organism, breathing and expanding across continents. The thought sends a shiver through you. If you could zoom out, you'd see this microbial empire stretching along coasts across the globe. Not isolated patches, but sprawling dominions. Each one exhaling more hydrogen sulfide, each one reinforcing the haze that blankets the skies. It's not just a stink anymore, it's a planetary identity, the new normal of existence. You finally turn away, tugging your collar over your nose, though it's a useless gesture. The mats ripple once more in the breeze, as if waving goodbye, or perhaps more ominously, as if to say, "We're not done with you yet." The world dims. At first, you think it's just your eyes watering from the sulfur, but then you glance up, and the sun itself looks sick. It bleeds through a curtain of haze, no longer golden, but jaundiced, as if someone has smeared the sky with old mustard. Light no longer feels sharp and clean. It's weak, like the glow of a dying flashlight. You stretch out a hand and notice how the shadows blur, edges fuzzed as though the air itself refuses to let them exist clearly. This is what happens when the sky fills with volcanic exhaust and microbial belches. Sulfur dioxide and ash particles scatter sunlight, turning days into endless twilight. You take another step, and even the ground seems duller, colors muted beneath the yellow veil. Green plants look gray, water looks bruised, and the world around you feels trapped in a perpetual late afternoon that never brightens, never lifts. Mainstream geology confirms this dimming. Layers of rock from the end Permian show spikes of sulfur compounds, proof that aerosols once blanketed the planet. The sky became a filter, muting not just the light, but the very rhythm of life. Without strong sunlight, photosynthesis faltered, starving the base of food chains both on land and in water. It wasn't just poison in the air, it was famine hidden in the sky. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some models suggest sunsets in this world might have been both terrifying and beautiful. The haze could scatter light into deep reds, purples, even eerie greens. Imagine standing in a field, watching the horizon burn crimson while the air around you reeks of sulfur. Instagram-worthy? Maybe. Survivable? Absolutely not. Historians still argue whether this dimming was a temporary pulse or a long-term chokehold. Some think the haze cleared in bursts, giving brief windows of brighter days before slamming the curtain shut again. Others believe it lingered relentlessly, suffocating photosynthesis for centuries. Either way, you realize how fragile the balance is. Too much light burns, too little starves, and right now, the Earth can't seem to get it right. You pause, listening. The world feels muffled, as if the haze doesn't just dim sight, but dull sound. Even your footsteps seem quieter, swallowed by the air. You hear faint bubbling from a nearby stream, but it's subdued, almost embarrassed. The sulfur sting still burns your nose, but now it's joined by something subtler, the smell of damp ash, wet rock, a metallic tang that coats your tongue. You wander past a grove of dying trees. Their leaves are limp, discolored, barely clinging to branches. They tremble in the faint breeze, but without vigor. The ground beneath them is littered with fallen leaves, pale and brittle, as if life itself has been bleached away. A beetle crawls across your boot, sluggish, wings trembling as if too heavy to lift in this twilight. And then comes the pacing spike. The breeze shifts suddenly, the haze thickens, and daylight collapses. For a moment, you're plunged into near darkness, the world a dim blur. You stagger, pulse quickening, hands stretched out blindly. It feels like midnight has ambushed you in the middle of the day. You gasp, lungs burning with sulfur, heart hammering as panic claws at your chest. And then, just as suddenly, the haze thins. Light bleeds back, weaker than before, but enough to see. The fear lingers long after the moment passes. You laugh shakily, muttering, "A great daylight savings from hell." The joke is thin, but it steadies you, a scrap of normality in a world that no longer has any. Looking up again, you notice how the sun wavers behind its curtain. Not gone, not present, trapped, like an animal pacing behind glass. You realize how much you've taken for granted: crisp sunlight, sharp shadows, the way colors pop under a blue sky. Now every day feels the same, a monotonous haze where time itself loses meaning. And as you keep walking, with sulfur burning your nose and twilight pressing in from all sides, you understand. This is no longer the Earth of bright mornings and warm afternoons. This is the age of dimness, where the sun itself struggles to reach you. A faint rustle catches your ear. At first, you think it's the wind stirring dead leaves, but then you notice movement. A reptile, long-bodied and awkward, stumbling through the haze. Its chest heaves, sides quivering as it drags itself across the dirt. You freeze, watching, but the animal isn't hunting, isn't prowling, it's suffocating.
Its tongue lolls from its mouth, eyes dull, movements jerky. A few steps more and it collapses, twitching once before lying still. The air isn't just unpleasant, it's treacherous. Every breath you take pulls invisible daggers into your lungs. Creatures with delicate respiratory systems fall first, their bodies failing under the invisible weight of hydrogen sulfide. You cough, clutching your ribs, suddenly aware that your own breaths sound too loud, too fragile in the muffled world. Mainstream paleontology tells us that many animals of this era, amphibians, reptiles, even insects, were staggered by collapsing oxygen levels. The fossil record shows abrupt disappearances, entire lineages vanishing in the blink of geological time. Whole food webs fractured as prey died off, predators starved, and ecosystems unraveled like old rope. Here's a quirky tidbit. Scientists have found fossil burrows from this period, suggesting some animals tried to hide underground to escape the toxic air. Picture whole populations of creatures digging frantically into the soil, hoping the gases would pass them by. A few may have survived this way, clinging to life in pockets beneath the poisoned world. You glance at the dirt at your feet and imagine eyes staring up from below, waiting, desperate. Historians still argue over which groups were hit hardest. Was it the amphibians, tied too tightly to the poisoned waters? Or the reptiles, their lungs overwhelmed by sulfur and heat? Some argue insects took a surprising blow too, an event known as the Great Insect Die-Off. Entire buzzing swarms vanished, leaving behind eerie silence. You listen now, straining for the hum of wings, but all you hear is the faint fizz of sulfur vents. The pacing spikes come sharper here. You stumble over a carcass, half buried in ash, its ribs poking through like broken fence posts. The sight jolts your chest with panic. You gag at the smell. Not rot exactly, but sulfur-soaked flesh, sour and metallic. For a heartbeat, your brain screams, "Run!" But run where? The gas doesn't chase, it surrounds. You push onward, passing more signs of collapse. A once lush grove is now skeletal, trees stripped bare, bark blistered. A river trickles sluggishly, its surface smeared with oily film. Along the bank lie fish, mouths open, gills flared wide in a final silent scream. You crouch, staring at one, and notice its eyes clouded, its scales discolored. It looks less like an animal than a warning sign carved in flesh. The soundscape shifts. At first, it's silence, then faint wheezing, an animal still clinging to life nearby. You creep toward it and find a small amphibian, skin mottled and patchy, flopping weakly in the mud. It gasps, each movement slower than the last. You almost reach down, as if you could help, but the sulfur burns your eyes and forces you back. With a shudder, the amphibian goes still. The silence that follows is heavier than before. You can't shake the image. Entire herds staggering, lungs failing, bodies littering the ground until the earth itself is layered in death. It's not just extinction, it's suffocation. And the cruelest twist? At high enough concentrations, hydrogen sulfide dulls your senses. The creatures around you, and you yourself, might stop smelling it altogether, blissfully unaware until the final breath is gone. You inhale shallowly, chest tight, and mutter, "The air is lying to me." A bitter laugh escapes you, short and sharp, because it's true. This world tricks you right up until it kills you. As you step away from the lifeless amphibian, the sulfur haze drifts again, thick and low, clinging to valleys like a predator that doesn't chase because it knows everything will eventually come to it. And you realize the truth. Here, the animals don't just panic, they perish, quietly and without escape. The land feels emptier with every step, as if something has hollowed it out from the inside. You glance around and notice that where once there should have been movement, flocks, herds, swarms, there is nothing. The silence is so thick you could almost hear your own heartbeat echoing back at you. Then it hits you. This isn't just panic anymore. This is collapse. Ecosystems don't die loudly like a single creature gasping its last. They unravel quietly, thread by thread, until one day the web is gone. Plants wilt and soils turn sour by acid rain. Insects vanish, their buzzing gone from the air. Amphibians, reptiles, and fish follow, each link of the chain snapping until nothing holds the rest together. You walk through it all, an unwilling witness to the largest ecological implosion the planet has ever known. Mainstream paleontology calls this moment the tipping point of the Permian extinction. Coral reefs disappeared for millions of years. Forests shriveled into ghostly stumps. Food webs collapsed so thoroughly that predators died not from poison, but from emptiness. There was nothing left to eat. It wasn't just death in numbers, it was death in networks. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some fossil deposits from this time show bizarre disaster species, organisms that briefly thrived in the chaos, dominating landscapes because their competitors were gone. They were like opportunistic squatters in a ruined city, holding on while everything else crumbled. Picture scrappy little reptiles darting through empty forests, not thriving exactly, but existing where nothing else could. Historians still argue over the timeline of collapse. Did it crash suddenly in a geologic heartbeat, or did it grind down in waves, some ecosystems holding on longer than others? The evidence is split. Some places show sudden die-offs, others a drawn-out decline. Maybe both were true, different theaters in the same global tragedy. The pacing spike comes without warning. You crest the ridge and find a field littered with skeletons, sprawled in every direction. The bones are bleached, brittle, some half buried in ash. It looks like a battlefield, except there was no war, only air and water turned against life itself. The silence presses harder here, so thick that your breath sounds obscene in the stillness. You step carefully, almost reverently past the remains. Ribs, just like broken picket fences. Skulls gape upward, jaws frozen open as if caught mid-scream. A lizard skeleton lies curled beside a smaller one, maybe its offspring. The story is written in their posture. They didn't just die, they starved, suffocated, and failed together. The sulfur motif evolves here. The air doesn't just reek, it's a thief. It steals energy from plants, oxygen from seas, balance from ecosystems. You feel it clinging to your skin, an invisible hand tugging away at every strand of the web until there's nothing left but loose, useless threads. You imagine how it must have felt for the last of some species, a predator wandering empty forests, growing weaker each day as prey vanished. A school of fish darting through an ocean with no plankton to eat, only to sink slowly when their bodies gave out. The cruelest thought of all is that none of them knew they were the last. Extinction doesn't come with a warning label. It just arrives, quietly, and when the silence finally spreads across the land, it's already done. Your throat tightens, not just from the sulfur, but from the weight of it. You whisper, "The world forgot how to breathe." The words vanish into the haze, swallowed like everything else. As you walk on, the bones fade behind you, but the emptiness does not. It stretches ahead, mile after mile, a world without voices, without songs, without the hum of insects or the chatter of birds. Just you, the sulfur, and the silence of collapse. The air hangs heavy, pressing against your lungs like wet wool. The silence from before hasn't lifted, it's deepened. You hear nothing but the faint fizz of bubbles in stagnant pools and the whisper of gas slinking across the land. You descend into a low valley, and the smell thickens instantly, wrapping you in its invisible grip. The rotten egg stench isn't just a smell anymore, it's a presence, a predator lying in wait. You cough, stumbling forward, and then you see it. A pond, wide and dark, rimmed with scum. The surface pops and gurgles, exhaling plumes of hydrogen sulfide that roll lazily across the ground. And scattered along the banks are bodies. Fish, frogs, insects, dozens of them, half dissolved, their flesh soft and sagging as if the water itself is digesting them. A dragonfly wing glints faintly in the twilight, delicate as stained glass, still attached to a body that no longer stirs. Mainstream geology explains that during this era, the oceans turned into vast dead zones. Without oxygen circulating through the water, animals suffocated. Entire regions became lethal traps, killing faster than anything could flee. Modern scientists compare them to today's oxygen-starved dead zones in polluted seas, except those are tiny in comparison. Back then, it wasn't a patch. It was the entire ocean, transformed into a suffocating soup. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some researchers suggest that hydrogen sulfide escaping from these dead seas may have risen high enough to damage Earth's ozone layer. Imagine poison seeping upward, peeling away your only protection from solar radiation. Creatures already choking below would then be scorched above. You rub your arms instinctively, suddenly aware of how fragile skin feels when the sky itself is unsafe. Historians still argue whether the collapse of oceans drove land extinctions or the other way around. Did poisoned seas bleed gases onto land, suffocating forests and animals? Or did volcanic fallout first ruin the land, with the oceans collapsing in response? The timeline blurs, each disaster tangled with the next. The pacing spike hits you like a punch. The gas thickens suddenly and your knees buckle. Your vision blurs, a veil sliding over your eyes. You claw at your throat, lungs screaming, but the smell is gone. That's the danger. At high concentrations, hydrogen sulfide numbs your senses. No warning, no stink, just silence. Your body sways, collapsing forward, until, mercifully, the wind shifts. The gas thins. You gasp, shuddering, each breath ragged, and realize how close you came to lying among the others on the bank. You stagger upright, heart racing, and try to laugh. Guess that was the world's worst spa treatment. The joke is bitter, but it steadies you. The landscape mirrors your panic. Pools hiss softly, releasing puffs of death. The ground squelches underfoot, slick with slime. Insects cling weakly to reeds, wings drooping, their buzzing faint and uneven. You hear a splash, then nothing. Another creature gone, swallowed by the soup. You crouch and touch the soil near the water's edge. It's black, heavy with organic matter that never decayed because no oxygen was left to break it down. You pull your hand back quickly, wiping it on your clothes, but the black smear lingers stubbornly. This is the record keeper, the very sediment that tells scientists today how lifeless these waters once were. You carry the stain as if the earth itself refuses to let you forget. The sulfur motif sharpens yet again. It's not just smell, not just poison, it's a thief of memory. It erases voices from the air, life from the water, balance from the soil. It robs the world of its rhythm until only silence remains. You turn away from the pond, lungs still aching, eyes burning. Behind you, bubbles pop softly, like laughter too low for you to hear. The dead zone doesn't chase you. It doesn't need to. It knows everything eventually finds its way back to the water.
Your legs ache as you climb out of the valley, each breath shallow and cautious. The sulfur haze trails behind you like a bad memory, but you know it's everywhere, inescapable. Yet, not everything has died. Against all odds, a few stubborn survivors cling to existence, playing nature's cruelest lottery. You spot movement near a cluster of rocks, a small reptile, thin and wiry, dragging itself toward a shaded crevice. Its sides heave, but it moves with purpose. When it slips inside the crack, you crouch, peering closer, and realize it's not alone.
Inside the darkness, faint shapes stir. A pocket of safety, air not yet saturated, maybe cooler, maybe less poisonous. Burrows and crevices become lifeboats, shielding fragile lungs from the apocalypse above. Mainstream paleontology calls these creatures disaster taxa. They weren't the strongest or the fiercest, they were the luckiest, with quirks that let them survive where others failed. Some had slower metabolisms, needing less oxygen. Some could hunker down in burrows or tolerate foul water. They were the lottery winners of life, scraping by while everything else toppled. Here's a quirky tidbit. Scientists think certain worms may have survived by developing bizarre metabolisms, capable of digesting sulfur compounds that killed other creatures. Imagine an animal that can treat poison like protein, snacking on the very substance that makes the world unlivable. In a sense, these worms became apocalypse connoisseurs, thriving in what would kill you instantly. Historians still argue about how much survival came from adaptation versus sheer luck. Were these species truly designed for catastrophe, or did they just happen to be in the right place at the right time? Some lineages vanish despite seeming hardy, while others limp forward for millions of years. The difference between extinction and survival often comes down to chance. You continue walking, ears tuned to any sound. The world is quiet, but every so often you hear faint scurrying beneath the ground, burrowers hiding from the gas. Once you glimpse the flash of movement in a muddy stream, a fish, tiny and pale, darting through water thick with slime. It vanishes quickly, but its presence is enough to jolt you. Life hasn't vanished entirely. It hides, mutates, adapts, cheats. And then the pacing spike. A sudden gust of wind shoves sulfur into your face, and your body reacts instantly. You drop to your knees, retching, eyes burning. You claw at the dirt, desperate for cleaner air, and realize the irony. The burrowers below you are safer than you are. You're exposed, vulnerable, lungs wide open to the poison. For a dizzy second, you almost envy the worms. The gas thins again, and you stumble upright, wiping your mouth. A bitter laugh escapes, survival of the smelliest. It's grim, but it breaks the tension long enough for you to breathe shallowly and keep moving. You begin to notice patterns. The landscape isn't uniform death, it's patchwork. Pockets of life persist here and there, tiny strongholds in a collapsing world. A lizard tucked into shade, worms thriving in sludge, microbes carpeting pools. Survival doesn't look noble or grand, it looks scrappy, desperate, clinging. The sulfur motif shifts once more. It's no longer just a killer, it's a gatekeeper. It decides who breathes and who doesn't, who eats and who starves. It's a cosmic dealer, handing out cards at random, and only the strangest hands win. As you walk on, the silence feels less absolute. It's still heavy, but beneath it you sense faint threads of persistence, life refusing, however stubbornly, to let go. You exhale, chest tight, and realize something unsettling. This planet isn't lifeless, it's selective. And you're definitely not holding the winning ticket.
The ground crunches beneath your feet, brittle as old parchment. You step carefully, listening to the faint crackle of roots snapping in soil that no longer feels alive. The forests you once imagined as towering and lush are thin now, skeletal. Trees stand like broken matchsticks, bark peeling, branches bare. The air reeks not only of sulfur, but of decay, as though the land itself is rotting from the inside out. You pass a stump, charred black, and kneel beside it. The wood crumbles in your hand, dissolving into powdery ash. This isn't just dead timber, it's evidence of a world that can no longer sustain its green canopy. Acid rain, carried by volcanic fumes, has scoured the soil clean of nutrients. Roots claw through dust, desperate but useless. The forest has become a graveyard of trunks. Mainstream paleontology shows that whole plant lineages collapsed during the end Permian. Fossil pollen records tell the story. Diverse forests gave way to monotonous, sparse scrub. Rich ecosystems of towering trees shrank into scattered pockets, and even those barely clung on. Without plants to stabilize soils, erosion scarred the land, rivers clogged with sediment, and the collapse only accelerated. Here's a quirky tidbit. Fossilized charcoal from this era suggests that wildfires raged across the weakened forests. With vegetation sparse and conditions unstable, flames swept the land, leaving behind blackened scars. Imagine the irony. Forests already dying from sulfur skies, now igniting in firestorms, as if the planet wanted to salt its own wounds. Historians still argue how much of the devastation came from acid rain versus heat stress versus starvation of nutrients. Was it the soil chemistry that doomed forests, or the unrelenting haze that starved photosynthesis? Some claim global warming drove the shift, pushing ecosystems past thresholds they couldn't recover from. The debate continues, etched into every fossilized grain of pollen. The pacing spike comes when the wind shifts, and suddenly the sulfur sting grows so intense it feels like knives up your nose. Your vision blurs, tears streaking your face. You stumble against a tree, its bark slimy with microbial mats, and recoil at the greasy texture. The tree itself seems to groan under the weight of poison, a faint creak as if it's trying to stand but no longer has the strength. You laugh weakly, voice hoarse. Guess air freshener won't cut it here. The joke falls flat, but it keeps you moving. You step deeper into the thinning woods. The ground is bare in patches, stripped of undergrowth. Small streams cut channels through mud, but instead of gurgling clear water, they run black with sludge. You peer into one and see the reflection of the sulphurous sky rippling back at you. No fish dart below the surface, only scum. And yet, here too, stubborn survivors cling on. You spot a fern unfurling beside a boulder, its fronds a weak, pale green. It looks fragile, yes, but it's alive. A beetle crawls along its stem, slow but deliberate. Against the odds, some plants adapt, tolerating acidic soils or sheltering in microhabitats. These are not forests as you knew them. They're scattered fragments, alien landscapes where life looks unfamiliar. The sulfur motif changes here. It's not just a smell or a poison anymore. It's a paintbrush. It has turned the land alien, remade the forests into shadow versions of themselves. The world doesn't just stink, it looks wrong, feels wrong, sounds wrong. Even the silence here feels edited, trimmed of birdsong and the rustle of mammals. As you leave the grove behind, you glance back at the skeletal trees, their branches raised like pleading hands. The forest doesn't whisper, it begs, and the sulfur haze drifts on, indifferent to every unanswered prayer. The haze has thickened again, wrapping the world in a yellow-brown blanket. You walk slowly, every breath shallow, each inhale a gamble. The silence has become second nature. You no longer expect birdsong or buzzing wings. Instead, the only constant is the faint hiss, the almost musical whisper of gas seeping from cracks, from pools, from the very soil beneath you. It's the sound of a planet exhaling poison endlessly, as if the earth itself has lungs filled with rot. This is the long sulfur night. Not hours, not days, but thousands upon thousands of years where hydrogen sulfide ruled the atmosphere like a tyrant. Every dawn breaks dim and sickly. Every evening bleeds into the same jaundiced twilight.
Generations of creatures live and die without ever seeing a clear sky. Mainstream paleontology confirms this reign. The Great Dying wasn't a single blow. It was a drawn-out era where waves of extinction rolled over the planet in pulses. Each surge of volcanic fury spewed more gas, reigniting the cycle. The Earth didn't heal quickly. It simmered in its own fumes, trapped in a toxic stasis. Here's a quirky tidbit. Scientists estimate that during this time, the oceans may have produced vast amounts of methane as well, adding another layer of greenhouse chaos. Imagine the world not just stinking of sulfur, but belching methane like a cosmic flatulence episode that lasted millennia. You wrinkle your nose reflexively, even though the air already smells like 10,000 eggs gone bad. Historians still argue how long the sulfur night truly lasted. Some claim recovery began within a few million years. Others suggest it stretched longer, with ecosystems stumbling repeatedly as new pulses of gas reignited disaster. The rock record is smeared, the evidence fractured, leaving the timeline as hazy as the sky you stare into now. The pacing spike jolts you mid-step. A sudden rush of gas swirls around you, and for a few terrifying seconds, the world tilts. Your head spins, vision narrowing into a tunnel. The stench vanishes completely, always the deadliest sign. You stagger, clawing at the air, lungs screaming. The earth seems to lurch beneath you, and you nearly topple into a shallow pit where bubbles rise sluggishly from a pond. Somehow, the wind shifts again. Air clears, faint but real. You collapse to your knees, gasping like a fish on land. You spit bitter saliva and manage a hoarse laugh. Note to self, don't go for a jog here. Humor tastes thin in your mouth, but it keeps the panic at bay. You push on, the world around you bleak and alien. The ground is a patchwork of cracked soil and slime. Pools hiss and gurgle like cauldrons, each one exhaling invisible fumes that creep outward in lazy, lethal waves. You picture the gases moving like predators, slow, patient, certain. They don't have to chase, they know time is on their side. The sulfur motif deepens here. It's no longer just poison, it's permanence. A monarch sitting smugly on its throne, unchallenged, uncontested. The smell isn't a phase, it's identity. The planet itself has become sulfur. Every breath, every sound, every sight refracted through its foul crown. You glance upward. The sun is a pale coin behind the haze, so faint it barely casts shadows. You realize that for countless generations, this was all life knew. No blue skies, no bright mornings, no stars unblurred at night. Just endless twilight, the earth smothered in its own exhalations. You shiver despite the heat, because in this long sulfur night, time itself feels broken, and the terrifying thought creeps into your mind. What if this isn't just history? What if the Earth could slip back into this nightmare again? The haze still clings to the horizon, but something feels different. You pause, sniffing cautiously, expecting the same rotten tang to sting your nose. And it does, but fainter. The air, though far from clean, carries a ghost of clarity. It's like opening a window in a smoky room. Not fresh, not safe, but better. For the first time in what feels like forever, you sense the possibility of a shift. This is recovery's first breath. The winds have begun to change, pushing the blanket of hydrogen sulfide in new directions. Oceans, long stagnant, start to stir again. Currents pick up, faint but crucial, circulating oxygen back into waters that were suffocating for eons. The process is glacial by human standards, millions of years, but on the timescale of Earth, it's a cautious inhale after centuries of choking. Mainstream geology tells us that after the worst volcanic pulses subsided, Earth's systems slowly began to stabilize. Sulfur aerosols settled out of the atmosphere. Rain diluted and washed away poisons. Microbial mats thinned in places, losing their monopoly. Oxygen seeped back, drop by drop, into seas that hadn't breathed in ages. It wasn't a triumphant rebound, but a hesitant shuffle toward balance. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some fossils from this period show strange combinations of life, organisms that usually wouldn't share the same ecosystem appearing side by side. It's as if survivors, scattered and desperate, stumbled into new neighborhoods, creating awkward, temporary communities. Picture a forest where odd ferns grow alongside weird disaster shrubs, while insects scuttle in from refuges no one expected them to emerge from. Historians still argue about how uniform this recovery really was. Did certain regions rebound quickly while others lagged for millions of years? Some evidence points to patchwork revival, oases of stability surrounded by seas and lands still steeped in poison. Others suggest global improvement, a slow but steady healing that swept across continents. The answer may lie in both, recovery in fits and starts, as fragile as it was uneven. The pacing spike comes when the Earth itself seems to test this fragile balance. You're walking beside a stream when suddenly it foams violently, releasing a burst of gas that rolls toward you. You stagger back, gagging, eyes streaming. For a moment, panic grips you, the nightmare returning, sulfur reasserting its throne. But the gust passes quickly, diluted by fresher air. You suck in a shaky breath, realizing that survival now is about endurance, not escape. You force a dry laugh. Guess Earth's detox comes with side effects. Looking closer, you notice the difference isn't just in the air. Along the banks, tiny plants unfurl. Not lush, not dominant, but alive. Their shoots stretch tentatively toward the jaundiced light, defiant against the poisoned soil. A beetle crawls slowly across one stem, its movements weak but determined. The soundscape shifts too. It's subtle, but there. A faint rustle, a tiny buzz, threads of sound weaving back into silence. The sulfur motif softens here. The smell is still present, still sharp, but it no longer feels eternal. It feels like an old tyrant losing its grip, the perfume of death diluted into the background. It's not gone, it will never be forgotten, but it's no longer absolute. You realize the irony. Survival isn't glamorous. It doesn't arrive in sweeping victories or dramatic resurrections. It arrives in whispers, in the stubborn stretch of a fern, in the weak crawl of a beetle, in the faint lift of cleaner air. The apocalypse isn't undone in an instant. It's chipped away by persistence. And as you keep walking, lungs burning but steadier than before, you catch yourself inhaling a little deeper, daring to believe that maybe, just maybe, the world is learning to breathe again. The air still tastes faintly of sulfur, but now it mingles with something else, green. You breathe shallowly, cautious, yet catch the unmistakable scent of life pressing back through the stench. Ahead, the land doesn't look quite as barren. Patches of vegetation break the monotony, not forests yet, but clusters of ferns, spindly shrubs, and small pioneering plants. Their colors are pale, washed out compared to what you know of modern greenery, but after endless haze and ash, they look like miracles. This is the new world rising. Ecosystems, shattered and scarred, begin to reorganize. The survivors, those odd disaster taxa, adapt, diversify, and edge into spaces once dominated by giants. You see small reptiles scurrying across open ground, opportunists feasting on insects that have crept back into the picture. Streams carry algae again, faint threads of green wriggling through water that was once only black sludge. It's not paradise, but it's recovery, raw and imperfect. Mainstream paleontology tells us that in the Triassic, life clawed its way upward from these ruins. Lineages that barely scraped through the Great Dying became the ancestors of new dynasties. Early relatives of mammals appeared, awkward but determined. Reptiles diversified, testing shapes and sizes that would eventually dominate. It's the evolutionary equivalent of rummaging through a wreck and finding enough scraps to start building again. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some fossil evidence suggests the earliest ancestors of dinosaurs emerged in this period of recovery. Picture them not as the towering beasts you know, but as small, wiry creatures darting through scrubby landscapes, unnoticed in a world still stinking of sulfur. They were background players then, yet their persistence in this stinking aftermath set the stage for their future reign. Historians still argue about how long it took for stability to return. Some claim it took over 10 million years for ecosystems to truly rebuild. Others argue pockets of diversity returned faster, only to collapse again when aftershocks, small volcanic pulses, climate swings rattled the fragile balance. The debate underscores just how delicate survival was. Recovery wasn't a clean climb, but a stumble up a broken staircase. The pacing spike arrives when you crest a hill and freeze. Below you, a herd of small reptiles scuttles across a clearing, dozens of them moving like a living tide. For a moment, the land feels alive again. But then the wind shifts, sulfur curls through the air, and half the herd stumbles. Some collapse outright, twitching in the dust. The survivors scatter, their fragile community fractured in an instant. Recovery, you realize, comes with constant reminders of how thin the margin still is. You swallow hard and let out a shaky laugh. Guess even evolution comes with fine print. And yet, you notice something different in your own mood. For the first time in this sulfur-choked journey, you don't feel only despair. The stench still clings, but the sight of ferns, beetles, algae, and even scurrying reptiles adds a thread of stubborn optimism. Life doesn't just return, it reinvents. The sulfur motif shifts again. It no longer feels like an endless tyrant, but a ghost, a lingering specter woven into the background. Every breath still carries the rotten tang, yet life pushes through it, grows around it, adapts to it. The planet smells like death, yes, but beneath that odor lies the aroma of resilience. As you continue forward, you spot a patch of pale green stretching across the horizon. Fragile though it is, the land no longer feels alien. It feels transitional. The earth, scarred and poisoned, is rising from its own ashes. Slowly, unevenly, defiantly. The sulfur haze has thinned further, though it still lingers, a ghost clinging stubbornly to the edges of the air. You draw a cautious breath, and while the stink remains, it no longer feels like the whole story. The land around you has begun to change, though its scars are everywhere. Jagged cliffs streaked with minerals rise to your left, their layers like pages in a burned book. Each stripe of rock whispers a memory of catastrophe, the sulfur locked into stone. This is the planet remembering. The earth itself has preserved the rotten age in its bones. Black shales rich with organic matter, sulfur isotopes etched into sediments, charcoal streaks marking where forests burned. You're walking across an archive of apocalypse, the ground beneath your feet a diary of poison and silence. Mainstream geology treats these rocks like crime scene evidence, fingerprints of hydrogen sulfide, sulfur dioxide, and carbon that together sketch the culprit list of the Great Dying. Here's a quirky tidbit. Geologists sometimes describe these rocks as whiffs of ancient air. Tiny bubbles, trapped in minerals for hundreds of millions of years, hold chemical traces of the gases that once ruled the skies. Imagine cracking open a rock and literally sniffing a faint ghost of that sulfur stench. Talk about a perfume nobody asked for. Historians still argue about how to interpret these scars. Some claim the layers show a single drawn-out disaster. Others read multiple pulses, like aftershocks from an earthquake, each one slamming ecosystems back into collapse. Was it one apocalypse or many? The rocks don't tell you directly, they only whisper through chemistry, leaving humans to argue over the translation. The pacing spike arrives when you stumble across a gulch where skeletons are half embedded in stone. Their bones are streaked with minerals, fused into the rock itself. They're not just fossils, they're memorials. One reptile lies twisted mid-stride, forever frozen in its last attempt to flee. You crouch, tracing its outline with your eyes, and the weight of its story presses into you. It never knew it would become evidence, it only knew fear. You inhale sharply, and the sulfur sting reminds you this isn't just a story, it's the residue of reality. You manage a thin chuckle. Well, at least the planet kept receipts. Looking up, you notice how the land feels like a scarred battlefield. Every ridge, every mineral-stained slope, every blackened shale bed tells of what came before. And yet, even here, new shoots break the soil, fragile but defiant. Life has returned, but the land has not forgotten. It carries its trauma in every layer. The sulfur motif evolves again. It isn't only a smell now, it's history itself, written into stone, a signature that endures far longer than the creatures it killed. You can almost imagine the earth whispering through the rocks, "Remember what happened when I couldn't breathe." As you continue across the scarred landscape, the silence feels less like absence and more like reverence. The earth isn't empty, it's contemplative, carrying the memory of its own near death. And you realize that you're not walking through ruins anymore. You're walking through testimony, a planet that recorded its own apocalypse so future eyes and future lungs would never forget. The path grows gentler now. The sulfur haze hangs thin, diluted to a faint yellow smear against the horizon. You breathe carefully, and while the rotten tang still scrapes your nostrils, it's weaker, more like a sour aftertaste than a slap to the face. For the first time, you feel less like you're inside the apocalypse and more like you're walking through its echo. This is the final reminder: the story isn't over. Today, geologists can read the scars of the Great Dying in black shales, sulfur isotopes, and fossil gaps. But they also look at modern oceans and see familiar patterns: warming waters, oxygen loss, microbial blooms, and yes, rising hydrogen sulfide in certain dead zones. The thought slams into you with the weight of déjà vu. The chemistry of extinction isn't locked in the past, it's stirring again. Mainstream science warns that when oxygen levels drop in modern seas, bacteria that thrive on sulfur seize their chance. Already, patches of the ocean smell faintly like rotten eggs, tiny reminders of the ancient world. If those patches spread, if climate stress worsens, Earth could replay its darkest chapter. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some modern coastal waters, people have reported mass fish kills after sudden hydrogen sulfide burps from the seafloor. The smell, rotten eggs, unmistakable, was the only warning before thousands of fish floated belly up overnight. Imagine that on a global scale, and you've just described the end Permian apocalypse. Historians, scientists, and climatologists still argue over how close we are to such a tipping point. Are modern oceans resilient enough to resist collapse, or are we quietly nudging them toward déjà vu? The debates rage in journals and conferences, but the rocks don't care. They already hold the memory of what happens when the balance tips too far. The pacing spike arrives when you imagine it viscerally, the smell creeping into your own world. You picture stepping outside your front door and gagging, lungs burning, as the air itself turns traitor. Cars sit abandoned, cities silent, oceans foaming as fish wash ashore. The Earth doesn't need meteors to kill, it just needs chemistry, twisted and relentless. You choke on the thought and force out a dry laugh. Guess we're really good at repeat performances. Humor, brittle as it is, steadies you. And then, the sulfur motif reaches its final form. It isn't just a smell, a poison, or even a scar. It's a warning. The Earth has already whispered once, through haze, death, and silence, that balance can shatter. It carved the lesson into stone, etched it into isotopes, preserved it in the silence of vanished forests. And now, with every dead zone, with every whiff of sulfur rising from modern seas, the earth seems to murmur again, remember. You stop, gazing across the horizon. The haze shimmers faintly, tinted gold by a sinking sun. The air is heavy but survivable, foul but thinner than before. The worst is over, for now. But the lesson lingers in every breath you take. Survival isn't guaranteed, and the stench of rotten eggs is more than memory. It's a prophecy, waiting for a careless hand to make it real again. You slow your steps. The sulfur haze, faint though it remains, softens into background, no longer sharp enough to sting. The pools bubble more quietly now, their hiss blending with the breeze. The land stretches before you, scarred but calmer, carrying both the memory of devastation and the quiet persistence of recovery. Breathe gently. Imagine the long arc of life. The way forests fell, seas suffocated, and skies darkened, only for small shoots, tiny insects, and resilient reptiles to return. Life didn't roar back. It crept, fragile and patient, remaking the world thread by thread. And as you picture this slow rebuilding, let the rhythm of that persistence calm you. Your eyelids grow heavy. The rotten egg stench that once felt overwhelming now drifts like a faded ghost, a reminder that even the worst nights eventually pass. You can almost hear the world exhale, its pulse steadying, its silence easing into something gentler. The scars remain, yes, but they are part of the story, the proof that survival, however battered, is possible. Let your breath mirror the earth. Inhale slowly, steady and calm. Exhale even slower, letting tension leave your body as the sulfur haze itself is lifting from your lungs. Imagine yourself lying on soft ground, the faint rustle of ferns around you, the whisper of wind carrying not poison, but promise. And as the sky fades into darkness, stars returning one by one, you can rest, knowing this: Earth endured, life endured, and so will you. The apocalypse may stink of sulfur, but its memory carries the quiet assurance that tomorrow always comes. Sleep deeply now and dream sweetly. The long sulfur night has ended.